section, we're going to be examining guidelines for a healthy diet, recommendations put forth by the federal government for being able to intake adequate nutrients, as well as make overall healthy lifestyle choices for the healthy adult. We'll be looking at the dietary reference values, which are values that are set for each nutrient intake goal. We'll be looking at the food guide and MyPlate recommendations, as well as the dietary guidelines for Americans. Before nutrient intake and lifestyle recommendations are made, of course, the goals need to be identified and set using good scientific research and evidence-based concepts in order to back up the recommendations. One of the primary survey-based studies that the federal government utilizes is the National Health and Nutrition Examination Survey, or the NHANES survey, which is ongoing and surveys Americans regarding their lifestyle choices, dietary intake, as well as health outcomes they may be experiencing over time. We also see individual assessments looking at dietary intake, including nutrient intake, physical health, perhaps height, weight, anthropometric measurements, medical history, and family history as well. One of the primary standards for nutrient intake is the dietary reference intake recommendations, and this term basically encompasses 4 specific intake goal levels, and we see the estimated average requirements, which we'll see in just a bit, the recommended dietary allowances, which we'll look at first, as well as the adequate intake levels and tolerable upper intake levels. And again, these are standards set for healthy people as well as all age and gender groups. The recommended dietary allowances are nutrient intake goals for individuals, again, of all age and gender groups, which meets the goals for almost all healthy individuals, about 97 to 98%. The adequate intake goals are only set when there is insufficient dietary evidence or scientific evidence to set the RDA. And some of the nutrients do have adequate intake goals set instead of RDAs. For example, calcium is one such that has the AI instead of an RDA. The upper intake level, or the tolerable upper intake level, is the highest daily average intake that's likely not to pose a risk of toxicity. So these are set in order to prevent toxicity, and several of our minerals have upper intake levels set. And again, it's important to understand that the DRI is designed for health maintenance and disease prevention, not set for those with illnesses or in order to resolve a deficiency. The AMDR are basically the calorie percentage ranges for our calorie yielding nutrients, carbohydrates, fats, and lipids. And these are set as a percent of total calories. So for carbohydrates, the recommendation is 45 to 65% of calories. For fats or lipids, it's 20 to 35% of calories, and for proteins, 10 to 35%. The RDA is set using the estimated average requirement. This is a value which is determined to see basically which average intake is going to meet the needs for half the population. Then that value is taken over to standard deviations, as you can see here, and the RDA is set quite high in order to cover 97 to 98% of the population. This is an example of a DRI table, and you can see on the left-hand column we have all age and gender groups, as well as those that are pregnant or lactating, which means breastfeeding. And this is basically the vitamin intake goal table. We see one for minerals, and then we have separate tables for the adequate intake as well as the upper intake levels. And these tables are all in the front cover of your textbook. We're not going to be memorizing these values in class. We will discuss some of them in context when we discuss the nutrients and the vitamins and minerals especially, but we're not going to go through and memorize all of these values as they are available to us in the tables. The next set of recommendations are the dietary guidelines for Americans. These are revised every 5 years, so a new version came out in 2015 and was released in 2016. And these are basically science-based recommendations to promote health and prevent chronic diseases. These apply to people over the age of 2. We'll look at the recommendations in just a minute, but to note some of the specific changes that we saw in the 2015 version is we did see a cap added on sugar intake, and this is for added sugar intake of no more than 10% of calories. That was a major change, which was really fought against by the beverage industry, as you can imagine, and I think was a really big win for those involved in advocating for healthy lifestyle and a healthy diet in this country. We did see a removal of the cholesterol recommendation. We've seen years and years of scientific evidence that tells us that cholesterol in our diet does not seem to negatively or adversely impact our cholesterol in our body. So cholesterol in foods, which we'll discuss at length when we discuss the lipids, doesn't seem to affect health all that much in the long run. So the recommendation was dropped in the dietary guidelines. And the themes basically in this Renew revision is to promote an overall healthy eating pattern, so for optimal intake patterns instead of just focusing on specific nutrients and or foods. So some of the general guidelines: follow a healthy eating pattern across the lifespan, focus on variety, nutrient density, and amount. So these are focused really at looking at balancing weight when we see amount discussed, as well as nutrient density to promote nutrient intake to meet the recommended goals. Limiting calories from added sugars, saturated fats, and also reducing sodium intake, and shifting to healthier beverage choices. This was a pretty important new theme in the 2015 guidelines. So to paraphrase them, we see a variety of vegetables and whole fruits being promoted. At least half of all grains should be whole grain. Fat-free and low-fat milk and milk products are recommended, and a variety of protein foods including seafood, lean meats, poultry, eggs, nuts, seeds, soy, and such, and eating healthy oils, or including healthy oils in the diet. Some of you might say, well, I don't believe in dairy products for humans, and why is that recommendation in the dietary guidelines? Something to consider is, of course, these guidelines are going to be influenced by industry lobby. So we do see industry lobbies for most food industries, if not all. That includes dairy, cattle, sweetened beverages, and such. So certainly we're going to see some amount of influence in the lobbying, but that's using the skeptical eye when it comes, or the cynical eye when it comes to government regulations and guidelines. There's not a huge body of evidence that say humans should not be consuming dairy products. It's really an individual choice, and the dietary guidelines do promote, if you consume dairy products, to go with fat-free or low-fat. We'll see if that guideline remains in the next revision. What we're told to watch out for: saturated fat. Don't eat too much of it, and keep it but below 10% of calories. Keeping trans fat low. And these nutrients I know we haven't discussed yet, and we will with each section on the nutrients. We have a whole chapter on lipids, on proteins, on carbohydrates, and so on. So you'll learn more about these nutrients as we go through the semester. Sodium, we're told to keep it no more than 2,300 milligrams per day, and added sugars no more than 10%. Again, that was one of the primary changes that we saw in this revision. And then keeping an eye on refined grains such as white bread, white pasta, and so on. And then if you consume alcohol, do so in moderation. It does not tell you to not drink alcohol, but it does say if we consume it, to do so in moderation. The dietary guidelines is basically helping, or aimed at helping, Americans to consume more of the nutrients we seem to fall short in, especially when it comes to potassium, fiber, magnesium, iron, and to help us reduce the nutrients where we seem to exceed, which is typically saturated fat and sodium. Again, the typical diet doesn't stack up all that well when it comes to the food groups. We see us not eating enough vegetables and fruits and dairy products, consuming too many refined grains and protein foods in general. We've historically also had graphics for recommendations in our dietary intake. It started way back in the 50s with the basic 4 food groups and moved its way into the food guide pyramid, which some of you are possibly familiar with. The next one I think will be a little bit more familiar to you, but this was the 1992 food pyramid, which was a stacked format showing grains making the base of the pyramid, then fruits and vegetables coming in next, then we saw dairy and protein foods with fats, oils, and sweets at the top. Certainly since 1992, plenty of research has shown us that oils are healthful, and in fact we need to consume more vegetable oils as an American public. So that has shifted quite a bit. And with this old pyramid, we saw the 2005 pyramid come out, which changed in structure, certainly. We saw the food groups becoming vertical as opposed to horizontally stacked, and the oil group was added. Here you can see there. And also a website was developed, mypyramid.gov, where consumers could go to get their specific intake recommendations. Notice there are no portion sizes, number of servings per day, just these columns, which should signify to consumers that the wider the band, the more we should consume of that food group relative to the others. And then we also saw this person walking upstairs to tell us we need to be more active as Americans. We won't watch this video right now, but I did include some videos in your module regarding the MyPlate, as well as dietary guidelines and reading the food label. So here we see the MyPlate, which was introduced several years back, and it was introduced in hopes of simplifying the recommendation for Americans, showing us what our plate should look like every time we eat. From half the plate being fruits and vegetables, one a little more than a quarter coming from grains, and then a little less than a quarter coming from protein with dairy at each meal. One of the primary criticisms of this, and of course it's not a perfect graphic, it does give us some basics to go by, but one of the primary criticisms when it first came out was that protein is not a food group, it is a nutrient in fact. And why do we include dairy, or recommend to include dairy at every meal? So, something to consider. Let's keep moving on, and we'll see what else we find out about the MyPlate. It emphasizes proportion as opposed to portion. Notice, we see no portion sizes here. So we see proportion, yes, half the plate should be fruits and vegetables, half should be grains and protein. We also see dairy at each meal, as I mentioned, and there are definitely some limitations to this graphic. Think about, before I move on and tell you, what do you see missing here? Well, we don't see any recommendation for water intake. We don't see any recommendation for physical activity. However, there have been various versions of this plate developed since then which provide those additional recommendations. The food guide follows along with the MyPlate, and this would be tailored based on one's calorie needs or calorie intake recommendations. So when you go in and do the dietary analysis project, you will receive a specific recommendation based on your calorie needs for food group intake. So we'll see this again when you do your diet analysis. Other versions of food guides have come out over the years, and here's one that's the Mediterranean Diet Pyramid. Notice this giant group of whole foods, whole plant foods really. It includes fruits, vegetables, whole grains, oils like olive oil, nuts, beans, seeds, legumes, herbs, and spices. So that should make up the basis of the diet. Notice at the very bottom of the pyramid we have physical activity, enjoying meals with other people, dancing, doing things that we enjoy, being active. The next section up is fish and seafood, then we see poultry, eggs, cheese, and yogurt. And notice meat is included with sweets at the very tip of the pyramid to show that a very small portion of the diet should come from those types of foods. And then we see wine and water as recommended beverages. We also have a Japanese food guide. It's a spinning top. So there have been, and there are food guides for basically every country, culture in the world for the most part. So, what could we do differently with our plate? Well, here's a nice revision of the plate by the Harvard School of Public Health, recommending healthy oils and water and whole grains and being active and so on. So this revised version of the MyPlate really gives us a little bit more detail, and notice that the dairy is gone from here as well. So, the food nutrition facts food panel. How many of you regularly look at the food label? And this is going to be found on every packaged food in the United States, and specifically food, not dietary supplement. Hopefully many of you have been reading these food labels for many years, and they have been on our products for many years, and we have actually seen a revision coming out. Now it is rolling out this year and will continue to roll out over the next few years. So what do we see on our Nutrition Facts food label? Well, starting at the top, we see a serving size as well as servings per container, when many containers contain multiple servings. We see calories from fat. This is going away on the new label. We'll look at the new label in just a moment. Total fat, breaking down saturated and trans fat from the total fat. We see cholesterol, sodium, total carbohydrate with fiber and sugars broken out, protein, as well as vitamins A, C, calcium, and iron. So these must appear on the food label. The bottom portion here is just a set of recommendations based on a 2,000 or 2,500 calorie diet. The daily value percentages are basically percentages of the overall daily goal of that nutrient that has been consumed when consuming one serving size of that product. So if we consume 2/3 cup of this product, let's say it is breakfast cereal, well, probably wouldn't be with 8 grams of fat. Let's say it is, and with the sugars being low, it's going to say cookies, and protein being where it's at. So let's say we've consumed 1 serving of this product, and we've now consumed 12% of our fat for the day. And if we look at sodium, we've now consumed 7% of our sodium for the day if we consume 1 serving of this product. But on the positive note, we consumed 45% of our iron for the day. The new label, so what has changed, and some of you have probably seen this on the shelves already. We see the calories shown in larger type and bolder. We see the fat here, calories from fat has gone away. Total fat and saturated and trans fat are still there, of course. We also see the serving size and servings per container, larger and bolder. We now see, and this is a very significant change, we see added sugars being brought out as its own line item. So this highlights the added sugar in the product. And we also see a change in micronutrients required. So vitamin D and potassium have been added, and vitamins A and C are no longer required. The ingredient list is given to us as well on the Nutrition Facts food label, and it is found towards the bottom. And it's important to note that it is listed, the ingredients are listed in order of most abundant to least abundant based on weight, not volume. We also see on labels nutrient claims, health claims, and structure function claims. We won't go through and memorize all these claims, but it is important for you to know and understand that these claims on foods are regulated by the FDA, or the Food and Drug Administration. The claims on dietary supplements are not as well regulated, and we'll come back to this concept a little bit later in the semester. But the claims on foods, for example, on oatmeal, this is a classic one with soluble fiber, tells us that it can help reduce cholesterol in the blood, and this is true. It has been well proven with scientific research that including soluble fiber in the diet can definitely help reduce cholesterol in the blood. So these structure function claims, these nutrient claims, these are regulated by the FDA, and they are backed up by scientific evidence. So we've come to the end of this section, and now you've been able to see what the federal government recommends when it comes to nutrient intake goals with the dietary reference intakes, overall lifestyle goals when it comes to the dietary guidelines for Americans, as well as the MyPlate goals, and hopefully you'll be reading your food labels more regularly, and in fact for our discussion board this week you will be comparing a couple of labels that you have found in your own home.